Chapter 15, Checks and Balances, a Theory Brief. Checks and balances are slightly more memorable terms for describing our analyze and match layers. First, we use a check layer to visually analyze how an object, element, or talent integrates with our background or backplate. Then we follow that up with a match or balance layer that is clipped over our talent, modifying it alone to better match its background surrounding. Included in the tutorial materials are the actions that create these essential check and balance layers for us. Let me share a quick word on presets and actions. A preset or an action is a recording of steps that produce a result in Lightroom or Photoshop. In my mind, there are two classes of presets and action. One class acts start to finish to modify the look of your image in much the same way a lookup table or an Instagram filter does. You have an image, you click on an action, it gives you one look. You click another action, it gives you another. Eventually you say, I like that. They give you results, but at a cost. You don't really understand how those results were arrived at, and you haven't had hands-on control of the nuances of each adjustment that went into that particular look. These can become a crutch and seriously limit your understanding and the future of your craft. The other class of presets and actions simply facilitate by taking over the time-consuming monotony of setting up certain steps. They are commonly ones that you build yourself, but whether you created them or not, once applied, you still have to go back, as the artist, understand the potential of each and physically leverage that potential to first match and then balance this new element within its new surrounding. There's no adjusting done on your behalf, and there's much less danger of you having no conscious relationship or understanding of why that type of adjustment layer was chosen or what it actually does. We're going to go through a few of the whys to get you up to speed. You won't need to remember why, but it should help to realize there actually is a reason certain adjustment layers were chosen over others. The point is, it's really time-consuming to build all those layers yourself for every piece of talent that you want to cut into an image, and can be an obstacle to your creativity as well. So I built myself two actions. I run the first, and it posts a group of analyzation layers at the top of my layer stack, which cause global effect. In other words, they affect both the background and the new talent layers below at the same time. Another action groups my asset or talent into a folder under several match layers awaiting modification. These are clipped to the asset or talent layer below, so their effects will only be applied to that asset or talent layer and not the background. In this way, we can individually enable the visibility of an upper check layer, and then in real time, while comparing the talent to its background, we can enable the corresponding balance layer and make the appropriate adjustments so that the two more organically and seamlessly match. Once a match is achieved, the upper check layer's visibility is disabled and the next check layer in the upper stack is enabled. In the next chapter, we'll first install the actions and then attempt a couple of real-time examples of putting them to good use. We're about to launch into analyzing and matching, otherwise known as checks and balances. In your download are a set of actions that facilitate this series of steps by first creating an assortment of adjustment layers for us. First, let's load these actions and add your Actions tool panel icon to your Photoshop workspace. Start by going up to Window, Actions. Close your Actions flyout by clicking the Actions icon arrow. Next, grab your Actions icon by clicking and holding on the thin dark gray bar and dragging it to your desired workspace location. Then, click on the icon arrow opening your Actions panel. Next, go to the icon in the upper right corner of the Actions panel and clicking it to open the drop-down, select Load Actions. Navigate to the location where you saved your downloaded tutorial and double-click on the Wild Landscapes Live Actions ATN file. It will load into your Actions panel ready for, you guessed it, action. Now, to run our actions, we'll go to our Wild Landscapes Live actions. We'll select the first one. Whatever your top layer is, you select the top layer and run that action. Next, we'll select the Cut in Talent Match Balance action, and you select your talent. Doesn't matter where it is in the layer stack, you select it, then run that action. Now we'll name it, in this case, Gunner. Close our actions panel, and we'll open this up. There's a couple of things I do as a preliminary check. You don't have to. Each case is different, but this is very helpful. And one is, I'll go to the threshold up here, and you can check your light direction and your shadow direction by sliding this back and forth. So as we come from right to left, you'll see where your first light shows. That's the brightest part of your image. As you continue going this way, now you can look at your subject in relationship to its surroundings. So my subject became bright way faster than this foreground did. So that's just something to keep in mind. Then as you go from the far left and you start moving right, those are the darkest areas of the image. And what you can do to tag these, you tap I for your eyedropper tool, and then go right over here, and somewhere in that, you hit Shift and click. Now let's go back to our threshold, and we'll go back and we'll show our brightest area, and we'll Shift click there. That gives us our two information tagged markers. Now go back up here and uncheck that. We won't need that anymore. So we'll start with Analyze Luminosity. Personally, I like to work with a gradient map. I've included both a gradient map and a curves adjustment for adjusting luminosity. Both work. Sometimes one works better than the other. Once you've done this a couple of times, it goes so fast that you can literally try 2 or 3 different ways and see which fits best in your image. Plus, there's an important note that I'd like to make. We're running through analyzing and check layers as per a standard of care of sorts. In other words, to the degree of prudence and caution necessary to match asset to background. And at the end, you can come back and visually adjust any of these to make it better match your vision of how this asset should be in there. And I'll show you how that works in a second. So let's try the gradient map first. The way the gradient map works is, by default, the mask is selected. It won't work that way. You have to double click on the adjustment icon, and then the adjustment icon has to be selected. Or when you expand the gradient editor and try and select a value to remap to, it will select from the mask instead of the actual background, and the background then will appear to it at least all white. It accomplishes nothing. So we'll select here, we go over and we know where our darkest part of the image is, and we click that. And remapping occurs. Now we'll click our highlight, we'll go over to where we've already tagged our brightest part of the image, and we'll click that. So these highlights on Gunner's head are now no brighter than the brightest part of the image. The darkest part of the shadows and the black on his nose are not some off the charts dark, dark, dark black. They are the black that we have in our image. And so we'll say, okay. Now, you can still go back, and sometimes it helps to go back and follow that up with a curves adjustment layer to adjust luminosity a tiny bit more. And you can always come back and change this later. So we'll click the targeted adjustment tool, and then we'll click on some point on him, say right here, this highlight. We'll Command or Control click on it. That sets a pin on here. Now you'll use your up or down arrows, so we'll go up a couple of clicks, and that brightens Gunner just a hair. We can also Command or Control click down here if we want in a darker area. If we wanted to increase contrast, see how it put another pin there? We can bring that pin down. Click, 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 and that will increase contrast a tiny bit. Personally, I don't think, because this image is so flat, that we want any contrast. So I'm not even going to use this luminosity layer. I was just more or less showing you how to use it. Okay, next, uncheck the visibility of the analyzed luminosity, and we'll check the visibility of analyzed saturation. And now you'll look here in the image. The sky is very saturated with color, but our foreground is not. I don't want Gunnar to match the sky. I want him to better match the saturation of the foreground. And so some of this area right here in the foreground is a little more saturated. So we'll go down here to our match saturation layer, check the visibility, double click on the adjustment icon, and now we just go up here and grab our saturation and pull it back down and stop it at an area where it better matches the saturation of the foreground. And we'll say okay. So now we uncheck analyze saturation and we check analyze hue. And hue, you can see it's very dim, and so we have a solarize effect that we do in tandem. So we check that layer, and now we can see better the effect of our hue. Now, one thing I want you to notice here, we've got some pinks in this foreground. This is reflected from the sky, and that might work okay for Gunnar's highlights, which we're going to address later. But see this mountain back here? That's the color that this side of him should be closer to. So we will go down to our match hue layer, check the visibility, click on here, and now we just grab the hue slider and see how we can change Gunnar's hue. And so we're going to bring that so that it's a little bit closer to that background. Right there, that's pretty close. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to do my saturation again and bring him just a little bit closer in so that that matches, and call it good. So now we uncheck this, and now Gunnar's much closer. Now I've left color to taste up here, and it's a bit more advanced, but if you understand how to use curves, you can then use each color channel separately. So if we do our reds, if you go up with red, it adds red. If you go down, it actually adds the opposite of red, which is cyan. And so we can see here he needs to come up just a hair. And so you take the targeted adjustment tool here, and let's say we want to bring his shadow area up just a hair. We'll click there, and now we're going to increase the reds just a couple of clicks with our up arrow. And you can see we set that pin and it adjusted it up just a hair. Now let's go to our green magenta. Nah, we're probably okay there. Let's go to our blue yellow. So blue is up, yellow is down, and we can see here on Gunnar there's quite a bit of blue going on in this image, and he has very little. So let's click right here on the highlights on his head. That set a pin right there. Now let's just tap our up arrow and let's add just a hair of blue to Gunnar. Now we're good. Our analyze check's all done, and we can see the finished product. Now, this is an extra copy of Gunnar that I put underneath it. So if we uncheck this, we went from that to this. And now we can see Gunnar fits quite a bit better into his background. We've still got to do his highlights. We've still got to do shadows. We've got a lot of work left. We've still got to do edging and whatnot. But color-wise, the overall effect is Gunnar much, much better fits into that background with just those few quick adjustments. And literally, once you've done this a few times, you can do that in a minute or two. So you can take your Gunnar layer here, make several duplicate copies, Control J, Control J, Control J, and then run this several different times. Run this entire action, and it'll group Gunnar number 1, Gunnar number 2, Gunnar number 3. You can go through this for practice and see, well, what if I increase the saturation? Or what if I, and you just play with it, and you'll get a better feel, and then look at your end result. And now we have our Gunnar effect. Okay, cool. Up next, we'll take a look at shaping.